Welcome to Order Militarist Radio TV, when we're lifelong Catholics, and we do is all for free, and for the love of Jesus Christ, and for Holy Mother, the Church. We'll defend our Holy Mother, the Church. Today we begin episode 2 of Agent Sniper, the Polish triple agent. I want to apologize if yesterday's first program seemed a little hard to follow. The introduction, the author Tim Tate likes to rehash and say certain information, so it really gets right into your memory hole. So if you thought I was rereading certain things, I was, but it was how it was laid out. So here we go. Let us begin on how he began to contact the West. On Wednesday, April 2nd, 1958, the bulky envelope arrived unexpectedly at the American Embassy in Bern, Switzerland, postmarked one day earlier in West Berlin. The package was addressed for the personal attention of Ambassador Henry J. Taylor. It contained a letter to him typewritten in German, wrapped around a second sealed envelope addressed to the FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover in Washington, D.C. The writer said the envelope contained a lengthy and detailed offer of enticing leads to Soviet bloc spies, which would excite American counterintelligence interests. He asked Taylor to forward it to the FBI and the FBI alone. He did not identify himself other than to indicate he was a Soviet bloc intelligence officer, somewhere behind the Iron Curtain, but he signed his message with self-chosen codename Heiken Schulze, a German word for sniper. On the face of it, Bern was an improbable location for an unsolicited approach by a communist spy. American intelligence viewed the Swiss capital as an unpromising backwater in the Cold War with Moscow. It had a meager track record of attracting defectors or would-be agents, and the little success which had been achieved generally resulted from deliberate American attempts to recruit their opposite numbers. Physical walk-ins were rare, written and anonymous offers of intelligence were completely unknown. So whereas the KGB used Switzerland as a route into the surrounding NATO countries, the CIA had concentrated the bulk of its efforts in Vienna and Berlin instead. Hitherto seemed an unlikely choice. He was a former newspaper reporter and foreign correspondent during World War II, who had developed a personal friendship with Dwight Eisenhower, then the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe. After the war, Taylor spent a decade broadcasting talks on NBC radio before Ike, now elevated to the White House, dispatched him to Switzerland. He was a neophyte in international relations. Bern was his first, indeed only, appointment as an American envoy, and his appointment as ambassador did little to raise his diplomatic profile. But if unusual, Sniper's decision was deliberate and strategic. From his insider's role within Soviet bloc espionage agencies, he knew that Moscow had infiltrated spies into all U.S. government departments except the FBI. According to Lieutenant Pete Bagley, one of the select group of American intelligence officers who worked on the sniper letters, in April 1958, he was convinced that the CIA was penetrated. He addressed his letter to J. Edgar Hoover, particularly to avoid the penetrated CIA learning of him. But by sending his offer to the Bureau via Ambassador Taylor, Sniper intended to bypass not just the CIA, but also the established hierarchy of the U.S. State Department, which he knew to be equally compromised. In April 1958, the American Embassy in Bern had only a small complete a small complement of agency officers, which limited the risk of leaks to Moscow. And Taylor's unconventional ambassadorial background meant that he owed little, if any, loyalty to Washington's Foreign Service managements back in Foggy Bottom. The second hurdle was personal. Taylor had recently crossed swords with Hoover over exactly this issue of jurisdiction. Shortly after his arrival in Bern, he formally asked the director to renew the FBI working under diplomatic cover inside the embassy. Hoover grudgingly agreed, accepting a promise that relevant information crossing the ambassadorial desk would not be withheld from the bureau. It was an undertaking that was never likely to survive its first serious test. But above all, Taylor's inexperience was the deciding factor. That early April morning, when Sniper's letter arrived, he had been in post for less than a year. Unsurprisingly, he was not willing to forward unopened mysterious sealed envelope to Hoover. Instead, he followed established U.S. government protocol and turned it over to the embassy CIA station chief, Lieutenant Pete Bagley. Bagley, a former U.S. Marine and political science graduate, who was also new in his post. An ambitious and rising star within the agency, he had won acclaim for 4 years earlier before bringing a KGB defector, Peter Dearborn's safety to Washington. He saw Byrne as an opportunity to advance his career and to be involved in everything that went on. He was, however, initially unimpressed by Sniper's offer of intelligence. That first letter, he later recalled, and evoked my suspicions. Like Taylor, he decided to stay within the tramlines of established U.S. intelligence practice and forward it to the CIA's prime Cold War operating station in Berlin. There, according to Ted Shackley, the officer on whose desk it landed, it met with a similar lack of enthusiasm. It was written in impenetrable form of double talk. Several of us had to go at it, but we could make nothing of it. The name Heckenschorsch itself looked as though it ought to be conveying something of deep significance. It seemed to imply either that the author was fighting a rearguard action or was covering his rear. Hoping that someday we'd hear from Mr. Heckenschorsch again, I had the letter filed safely away. The sniper saga might have ended there had Bagley not thought to send a copy of the strange message back to CIA headquarters in Washington, D.C. The agency then was a far cry from the monolithic organization it would later become. Staff were scattered across the Capitol in a series of ramshackle offices. The communication between the operation espionage branches and the analytical counterintelligence department was often haphazard. It was also at times argumentative. The sniper letter landed first on the desk of Howard E. Roman, an alumnus of the CIA's wartime predecessor, the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, and a former chief of the agency's Polish unit, a gifted linguist fluent in German. In April 1958, Roman was a senior case officer tasked with running agents in place, the most prized spies of all, since they risked their lives to operate undercover in the native countries behind the Iron Curtain. I was asked to examine the letter to see if we could determine what nationality the author was. Roman recalled 2 decades later. I could tell by the syntax that this was not a native German, since the writing was entirely about Poland. We concluded that we were talking to a Pole. We analyzed the typewriter in order to determine whether it was of East European make. He also analyzed the watermark on the paper. None of this yielded anything that made anybody suspicious. Roman's initial positive assessment of Sniper's bona fides was accepted within the agency's Soviet and East European sections, but it did not find favor. With the increasingly powerful head of the separate and frequent rivalrous counterintelligence branch, James Jesus Ingleton. Like Roman, Ingleton was an OSS veteran and had extensive experience of running agents in the field during wartime service in Italy. But the nature of his job, he had been the CIA's counterintelligence chief since December 1954, required him to take a skeptical view of intelligence officers arriving unexpectedly from behind the Iron Curtain. But despite his doubts, Ingleton decided that allowing the situation to play out a little might prove worthwhile. As explained to Roman, even a sniper was a provocation. At some point, his Soviet handlers would have to see genuine intelligence material within his information in order to give it credibility. It was the old question, Roman recalled. How much truth is the enemy willing to tell you in order to set you up for the big deception? The letter was duly passed on to one of the CIA's most highly regarded analysts. Richard J. Heuer was then 31 years old. He had been recruited in 1951 by the agency's deputy director of operations and future CIA director, Richard Helms. While a graduate student at the University of California, a philosopher by inculcation, and by his first university degree, Heuer became fascinated with the fundamental epistemological question: what is truth and how can we know it? It was this intellectual curiosity which had convinced Helms to hire the young student. In the 7 years since he joined the agency, Heuer had established a reputation as a cerebral thinker and was slowly expanding the CIA's understanding on how to spot a bogus defector or a seam of false intelligence. In April 1958, he was coming to the end of a tour of duty on the Polish desk, and like Ingleton, he calculated the odds before deciding that Sniper might be a bet worth placing. When that letter was referred to me for action, some colleagues said it was phony and told me not to bother. I said, "You never know." Nothing was lost by answering. Sniper's letter was, however, personally addressed to the FBI director, not the CIA, in whose lap it now lay. Moreover, to protect his existence from leaking back to Moscow, it set out detailed instructions for responding to their approach. The conditions were straightforward but unequivocal if the FBI wanted to pursue his offer. This posed a tricky problem for Heuer. His instincts told him that the offer was genuine and would be spy potentially extremely valuable. But Sniper's first and most fundamental condition had already been disregarded. He was determined to provide important information to the United States. Heuer later recalled, but he needed a secure way to do it. Because the agency had intercepted the letter, J. Edgar Hoover was blissfully unaware of its existence. And since the CIA was not yet prepared to inform the Bureau of Sniper's approach, Heuer decided on a simple, if deceptive, solution. He placed the advertisement himself, posing as the FBI director in the classified columns of the Frankfurter Allgemeine. He gave Sniper details of a CIO and post office box in West Berlin, where he could send reports and pick up subsequent requests for additional information. These messages were to be hidden in a secret writing concealed within the text of otherwise innocuous correspondence. All this was carried out in the Bureau's name, from the outset of a relationship which is hoped might prove crucial in deepening a relation in the deepening Cold War in Moscow. The agency deliberately deceived a volunteer agent in place over an issue that it knew could cost him his life. It was not an auspicious beginning. Sniper picked up the coded advertisement within days. In the early May, sent his first closely typed report. From that spring of 1958 and over the next 2 years, always believing he was dealing with Hoover's FBI, Sniper would mail the agencies a succession of multi-page, single-spaced letters of near monthly intervals, each providing extensive information about Soviet bloc spies in the West. It was, though he could not have known it, just what the CIA most urgently needed. This ends on how Agent Sniper made contact with the West and who intercepted his mail. We did a program already on the Russian side of things regarding Operation Trust. Now you're going to hear it from Agent Sniper tomorrow with his added information. Get ready for a show and tell like you can't believe. This is what I'm going to say to TV signing off. And it's full.